Greetings all. Welcome back to the Coptimizer podcast. Welcome, Greg. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks, Pat. Appreciate it, my friend. Happy to be here.
So we had a conversation a few weeks ago as we were getting to know each other a little bit for this podcast, and we found out that we've got a lot in common. And like this happened to me a few times. I wish I'd have just hit record back then, but we're going to get to do it again. So I am very fortunate to be able to have another conversation with you and talk about your background, your coaching history, and what makes you the 100% most retained coach in the performance coaching cadre. All right. So with that, I've set the bar very high. Now you've got to strive to meet it. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, Craig? Thanks for being here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And I don't know that I can compete with that introduction. However, I'll certainly give it my best. Yeah. I certainly have experienced success, early on, with performance protocol. And I think in large part just because honestly, I bring a little different dynamic to the table that isn't out there. I mean, there's a ton of people with great experience, far more experience than I have in the law enforcement field. But I think ultimately what it boils down to, and we touched on this in our last conversation, is the diversity, and having some diversity in the way of thought, the process of thinking, and how that plays into your overall performance and what you're doing, and how you're living your life, not just working on or working through your work life, but your life as a whole. And I think not being in law enforcement allows me to look at things and see things in a different way, in a different perspective, and shed some light to those individuals that I work with. And I think there's a deep appreciation because I'm not leading them down the path of what I've done. It's more exploring the path that they're on, and understanding, is it the direction that they want to travel for their ultimate journey to reach their destination, wherever that may be. So I think in a nutshell, that's maybe one of the separators that has led to my success. And I'm certainly excited, for more. And I love working in this space just because it puts me in front of such incredible people that deal with the worst of the worst on a daily situation, and the worst of the worst on the daily, in situations that you and I can't comprehend, sitting behind a microphone or a computer.
Yeah. And, and a lot's happened since we've had that conversation, and, law enforcement's taken it on the chin again, had another very, very public display of police use of force gone bad. I mean, that's just to put it mildly. I mean, pretty tragic what happened, but it in the conversation that we had, and I think that we'll have today, and that our audience will quickly realize, and one of the reasons why I was really excited to get on and do this show is that you do have a very unique perspective, and I think you have a ton to offer, and it's really important for people in the law enforcement profession to understand that while there are things that are unique to policing and unique to the stressors in policing, we're all human beings, and we all have our own demons, and we all have our own struggles. We all have our own successes. We have our strengths, but we all have areas that we need to work on. And I think you've got a ton to offer, and I think having an outside perspective to be able to help somebody, really focus on themselves. I just think it's a unique approach, and I think that's something that you bring, and it was something that you mentioned to me, that you don't necessarily need someone that's been there and done that with you, right? To teach them. You need a coach that can help people focus on themselves.
Yeah, 100%. Because the unique ability for an individual to look at themselves and say, hey, I am flawed. I do have issues. I do have character defects. I do have all of these, interpersonal struggles or conflicts, or as you stated, demons. Um, that's step one, is understanding and identifying that, hey, we are human, and we do have flaws. But what do you want to do about them? Do you want to go down the path that somebody else went down and just follow them? Is a follow the leader approach, or do you want to cut your own path and make it unique to what your needs, wants, and desires are? And I think that is the true connection of coaching, is not leading someone down the path that you've gone, and not leading them down the path that you may know, but moreover, understanding their needs, wants, and desires, and being able to focus the sessions on what's important to them. Why are they here? What is their purpose in life? And we talked about it last time, purpose versus passion. You know, you may be passionate about something, maybe passionate about law enforcement, maybe passionate about coaching, whatever. When your passion for that is here, your purpose needs to fill it. So then, like for me, I have a great passion in coaching, and I've been coaching for a long time. And when the opportunity, arose to be with and to work with Performance Protocol, I jumped at it because it served my greater purpose. So I was able to take my passion and make it purposeful. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of individuals, a lot of officers, a lot of leaders, quite frankly, don't understand the dynamic between the two. And when you're able to connect the dots and then create a path forward, and a genuine understanding around what it is that you want to accomplish and why, you're going to be far more successful in whatever it is, whether it's in law enforcement, whether it's at home, whether it's a part-time gig at the body shop, whatever it may be. When those two stars align, ultimately it's going to put you in a place of peace, but more importantly, put you in that having that attitude of gratitude to press forward.
Attitude of gratitude. I like that. Now, it maybe what you should ask, and I'm going to ask, I think, because I think it would just be interesting to hear someone that doesn't have the law enforcement background. When you see something, it's what we watched what happened in Minneapolis a few years ago. We now we're revisiting some of that same type of conflict that's arising from this case in Memphis. And I'm just curious, when you see something like that, as as a coach, and as you've worked with police officers, what is that? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you mind sharing thoughts like that? Of course, I don't want to put you on the spot, but
I have relevant opinions on a lot of things. The reality is this: there's three sides of every story: your side, my side, and the truth that falls somewhere in between. At the end of the day, what are the leading indicators? What are the leading factors that end up, causing a situation, an instance like that? How is it handled? What I look at, what I would more appropriately look at, is how do we break it down to understand that, one, this never happens again, and two, understand the why it happened, so that we can, as a company, as a culture, as a society, we can ultimately work towards the betterment and learning from that experience, albeit terrible and tragic on so many levels. Is how do we move past it? How do we move forward? Because if we constantly are digging up the dead bodies, we're never going to run out of dead bodies. They're everywhere. And now we have to look at it and say, can we learn from these experiences, and what can we take away, so that, one, society can go back to living the way that we should be living, which is in harmony, as opposed to having all the hate and discontent floating around, in the universe. It's not good. So, not to give you a political answer, but at the end of the day, I look less at, kind of what the overall impact is, and look more towards how do we understand and identify the why, and how can we fix it so that we're not faced with this in the future.
Yeah, and maybe this case isn't the greatest example, because it's pretty clear cut. It's police misconduct at the highest level.
Mm-hmm.
But when the tendency, I think, sometimes in law enforcement in particular, is that when we get these, this, what we see performance like that, the profession as a whole, is just, they just get pummeled. The officers on the street in particular are the ones that really suffer the brunt of this, and it adds more pressure to an already very difficult job. And sometimes the reaction is to go shields up, hunker down. Let's brace ourselves for what's coming. Let's try to, endure this next few months, weeks, months, years. I hate to say years, but that seems to kind of be the way it's going. Rather than just kind of like what you said, take the approach. It's okay, this is bad. Let's understand, how we got here, what caused this, but then also how do we identify things that might be going on, culturally in an organization that might be leading to these types of things, and how do we move past them? How do you provide the right type of service, whether it be through professional development, coaching, that's going to empower organizations to be better?
I want to touch on what you'd started to kind of beat a little bit, which is kind of near and dear to me, is kind of the what can we do. And you talked about the individual, especially on the deck plate, the officers in the streets, being the most impacted by a terrible situation such as that, because now it's the views. It's how are you getting looked at? How are you being identified? What scrutiny are you getting that shouldn't be yours? And then I go back to the posturing component of understanding the very basic principle of control what you can control, and how you respond is something that's very much in your control. So how you respond externally or internally, externally to external things, thoughts, or emotions ultimately is going to dictate how you're viewed, because you can only control your own personal perception, right? So acts of kindness, acts of gratitude in the public eye for you are going to yield great benefits and great thoughts and emotions towards you. And I think that's the one thing that those individuals, those officers, can control on their own. As you go higher up the food chain, higher up the chain of command, at the end of the day, it becomes their responsibility to start to instill those values and understand, okay, what are we giving? How are we giving? And then what is our purpose being served by our mission? And is our mission being served by our purpose? And, and not to go all hoo-hoo or, fluffy, you're going to get what you give. And when it comes to a situation where we're having this constant and continuous fight as a society, as a culture, because of brutality or bad things happening just in general, that's what we're focusing on. And if now we start to focus on the good measures and the good things that are going on, that's we're going to get more of. It's the general law of attraction. And it's true, whether people believe it or don't believe it, it is absolutely true. I was just talking to this morning, talking to one of my clients who is an officer, has a little part-time side hustle selling real estate. And at the end of the day, he reached out to me. He was focusing for probably the last 2.5 months on, hey, I haven't gotten any business in my real estate company. And I said, hey, look, stop looking at you haven't got. Start looking at the gain here. So go back to the gap and the gain concept, start looking at the gain. You've gained a real estate license, you've gained an education, you've gained some influence or interest in something that's outside of your normal purview. And he called me this morning and said, hey, guess what? I got my first deal. And it just happened. So he started looking at it differently. And in that and I'm not saying, hey, wish for a pot of gold and all of a sudden a pot of gold's going to show up, because that's not realistic. But
I'd be really rich if it were true.
And if you put yourself in the path of understanding and in the openness around good things happening for you, not to you, because nothing happens to you, everything happens for you. Those good things are going to start to unravel, and that's going to start at the individual level. It's going to, then it's going to move to the squad level, then it's going to move to the department level, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so with that in mind, we in policing, individuals, they do face a lot of individual stress, right? So we have busy schedules, and I think part of the problem too in the last several years is, we've got these it's an accumulation of these different stressors where we have fewer people coming into the profession. The demands on the profession are actually increasing, they're not decreasing. The pressure on improved performance is coming, and the resources to law enforcement officers aren't keeping pace with that. So here you have less people doing more work or being expected to do more work at a higher level without the appropriate investment. So that, it sounds pretty bleak when you say it like that, but I also think there's an opportunity there for us to maybe refocus on, okay, what is it that optimizes an individual? And for the people that we do know that are in the profession, we know that they care. We know that they're here for the right reasons. And aside from from the very rare one-offs, that's what we know we have. So how do we crack the egg in terms of getting cops to focus on self-care? How do we get them to open up and understand that there is even more potential there than maybe even they know or believe?
First things first, I look at it, and we talked about this, before. We probably one of the most disturbing or disruptive usage of words right now, in my feeling or my opinion, is self-care, because everyone chalks up self-care, self-care, self-care. I'm sorry, folks, those of you that are listening, self-care is not freaking bubble baths and BS. It's self-care is, what are you doing to actually free your mind, free your soul of all the stressors and all the rigors that are going on in your day-to-day. Whether that is, taking a moment to take a walk, getting a great workout in, providing your food, providing sustenance in the form of food that is, is good for the operational usage of whatever it is that you're doing. Those are things that are self-care. Reading a book, things that are going to nurture and nourish your body, not necessarily just relax, because self-care has gotten this just bad rep of it being all fluffy and feel good, and that's not the case. It really is about stuff that is good for you, and that comes in many different forms. Like I said, it comes in the form of food, it comes in the form of exercise, it comes in the form of just relaxation. Maybe hugging your kids, taking your kids for a walk, taking your kids to the park, whatever that may be. That is the form of self-care that we need to look at and identify and understand the importance around it, because you could take a lot of bubble baths and it's not gonna free your mind. It's not gonna free up bandwidth emotionally, or even physically.
Damn it, I love my bubble baths.
Yeah. So you think about the self-care aspect, and then it's also, what are you doing and why? How much bandwidth are you giving to everything? And I think one of the things that we touched on previously is, the frenetic pace that officers operate at. It's not just at work. They take that home with them. And I think that the example I brought up to you, Pat, previously is, my friends that are in law enforcement, when they got into law enforcement, they changed dynamically from the rip. They went to the academy, they got done, and all of a sudden they were a completely different person. And this hyper vigilance where you're at a barbecue and you're looking for perps, it was chaotic. And I saw this manifest more and more and more. And I never really understood why, albeit I was in the service for a long time. I worked on, special reaction teams. At the end of the day, I never took that home with me, because we knew that when we went home and took our stuff off, like we were not fighting any foreign enemies on U.S. soil, so there was nothing to worry about. Cops don't have that luxury. And at the end of the day, I think understanding what their own personal bandwidth is, and that's one of the things I go through with all of my clients, is what is their personal bandwidth and where do they want to focus that bandwidth? Because if you constantly are taking that home, all of a sudden something that happened during the course of your workday, during the course of patrol, whatever, all of a sudden that resonates now into what am I going to do? How am I going to act? How am I going to react to a situation or a circumstance that may occur at home, whether that's, going home and, kicking the dog, yelling at the wife, screaming at the kids about their homework, when in all reality, it has nothing to do with something they are or aren't doing. It has more to do with what you are or aren't feeling. And condensing that understanding around what is your bandwidth and when are you willing to cut it off to then move forward into your real life is paramount.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I want to touch on there. And I think it's interesting because I think uh, any any cop out there probably has felt that when you're going through your field training program, when you go through the academy, there isn't a long window to train somebody about all the things that can potentially harm and kill you. So, there's an obligation from a training perspective to make sure that we're giving officers the information they need to be able to, program the survival instincts. But there's also, I think maybe where we've done ourselves a disservice over the years is not teaching how to regulate that, how to turn that on and off, how to look at data that would inform us maybe what are, statistically speaking, what are the things that I should probably focus on, right? Like, I like to use the example of, from a physical wellness perspective, the chances of an officer dying from cardiovascular disease are exponentially greater than of dying from an assault or a gunshot wound. In the go to any maybe just now that we're starting to teach these things, but we've asked this at wellness lectures and presentations that I've done around the country. I've seen the question asked. I've asked it myself. Nobody's being taught how to prevent themselves from having a heart attack, but everybody's taught 8 different ways how to detect and avoid an ambush. Do we need to train on how to protect ourselves from ambushes? Absolutely. But the chances of dying from a heart attack are still going to be substantially greater than dying from an ambush. So how do we how do we really get a higher level of understanding on how to in a healthy way separate these things, like, so we don't show up at the family picnic wearing 2 guns, like, because you never know who's going to be there, right? Like, Aunt Betty's, Uncle Larry, he hangs out with some pretty pretty shady characters, and now I'm going to the picnic, but I'm going to be dialed in because who knows what might happen, right? Maybe that's not a good example.
No, honestly, I think it's a perfect example. I think what you have to understand is your job is your job. Your job isn't who you are. I liken it to, and this just came to mind when you were talking, because I kind of understood where you were going with the questioning. I liken it to this: you're not going to go to a close family member's wedding wearing flip-flops and board shorts. You're going to go dressed accordingly, correct? And that's the same thing. Where are you at in your life? What are you doing? Where's your focus? And that goes back to something that we talked about previously, which is, kind of just living in the moment and understanding that you are where your feet are. And that's what's most important, and in finding and seeking value in those moments. So when you're at work, you're living in those moments, and that is your job. That is the purpose and the principle of what you're practicing each and every day inside that time frame that you're there. The same can be said as when you're at home or you're at the ballpark or you're wherever. Be where you're at, and be appropriately where you're at. And understanding how to do that is, part of the things that I work with my guys and gals through, is understanding that it's okay to be there. that it's okay to put that guard down, because guess what? Your brother or sister in arms has your back while you're doing what you should be doing, where you should be doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction, and that's a hard thing to let go. I'm not gonna lie, that's something that I personally have always kind of struggled with, and even in retirement, you feel like you have an obligation because of your training, your background, your experience, that if something were to go sideways wherever you are, that there's a responsibility to intervene and do something. And uh, yeah, it's interesting, but
There's a difference between engaging when it's necessary and being engaged for the sake of being engaged. So there's something I'm working on right now, for another network that I belong to, EO, and it's Lego my ego. In its essence, let go of my ego, because that is the ego jumping in and saying, "Hey, I have to be the guy." No, guess what? You don't. You don't. You can't possibly be everything to everybody all the time. It's not there. If you're not right for yourself, how can you possibly be right for anyone else? It just doesn't work that way. And I think part of the process in coaching is understanding and identifying situations and circumstances that are relative to what it is that you want to accomplish and how you can go through accomplishing them. And more importantly, going back to just being in the moment.
so the old adage, right? If you try to be all things for all people, you wind up being nothing to anybody. It's like
Yeah.
something along those lines.
Yeah. It's 1,000,000% true.
Well, I guess with that being said, so your story, I think, is really powerful, and I think you're a great example of living the example of what you're talking about. And you said something that I think maybe is really, I think it's very powerful, but maybe how it connects to you and your background. But you talked about change. It has to be purposeful, and you just mentioned also that your passion must be purpose. You have to have that connection. Um, but how do you develop it, and then really, maybe using yourself as your own example, and uh, you know well, maybe even just cover a little bit about your background. I think we skipped
Yeah.
right over that.
Oh, I think I could tie. I think I tie some of that in, for those of you that are listening, watching, or however you're consuming this. At the end of the day, I'm a recovered alcoholic, Pat, and I talked about this, and so I speak a lot to addiction, alcoholism, etc. Uh, Probably going back a little over 3 years now. I had checked myself into a rehab facility down in, West Palm Beach, and how I got there was fascinating. I separated from the military, probably, I don't know, 2009 ish. Um, and at the end of the day, I'd started my first company, had a couple of kind of bridge jobs or whatever. And at that point, I was a kind of always a shoot, move, and communicate guy. I was always on the go. I took good care of myself and got into business. I did fairly well early on, kind of unexpectedly, and then all of a sudden I went from a guy that was making 35 grand a year catching bullets to, all of a sudden I was making six figures, and my ego started to creep in, and next thing you know, I was raging at the buffet. I was partying at the neighbor's house. Cocktails on Friday turned into cocktails on Tuesday, and kind of just carried over. And then, at some point, I was living in Arizona at the time. At some point, my wife kind of just got fed up because obviously I wasn't present. And we ended up moving back to the Midwest. Long story short, I ended up, buying into a business, getting into a business with my former business partner, and, the business did very, very well. And I was the operator, I was the managing partner, and at that point, his vision and views were completely different than my vision and views, and everything was a silver bullet for him, where I was much more methodical and letting things grow organically. Well, we became distant. And then kind of the addictive mindset for me was, at this point now I'm out of shape, I'm overweight, I'm creeping into, hey, I have all these things, but I was empty inside. And as that progressed, I used my degradation of our relationship as an excuse to consume more, to be less present, to be less involved in the moment with my family, with my friends, with anybody. And I was living in this almost alternate universe. So, kind of fast forward, that went on for 3 or 4 years, probably, to the point where, I was an absolute train wreck where, I might be picking up booze on my way into the office at freaking 7 a.m. It was just, I mean, to me, it's funny to look back at, because it seems so long ago. Uh, but the reality is, it was terrible. I mean, terrible and terrifying. So many things could have happened. You think of all the things that could have gone wrong, that fortunately, God was looking over me. Somebody was looking over me, to make sure that it didn't. Ultimately, I got to, reach a breaking point where I said, screw it. My wife and I had talked about, months before going to treatment. And then I absolutely had a huge episode, that came on the brink of a terrible fight with my business partner, that led to me just saying, I'm out. So I told my wife and my brother, and I vacated. I left for 30 days, checked into a rehab facility, at which point I decided in that moment, in a kind of a drunken stupor, that I was going to rebuild and rebrand my life to be who I actually am at the core, which is a pretty sound human being. And so when I checked into rehab, I said, okay, from day one, I'm open to anything and everything. And I'm going to allow all this information to resonate, with me. I'm going to accept what I need. And then I'm going to give it hell. And I did just that. You guys probably can't tell because I'm sitting, but I'm still very short. I'm 5'6". So when I checked into rehab, I was, I was still 5'6", but I was about 226 pounds.
Was there a
And
buffet there to rage at?
yeah,
I got to write that. That's going to be one of my
yeah,
favorite. Raging at the buffet.
yeah. So, and in treatment facilities, they have profit centers. They are profit centers. At the end of the day, you have good ones, you have bad ones, whatever. My wife found a fantastic one. And it was at that point where I decided, hey, this is all or nothing. I have 30 days to really kind of figure it out. Told no one at all. My brother and my wife were the only two people who knew on the planet where I was. And to my benefit, I think the single greatest moment in time was the understanding that when Greg was gone, the earth still spun, because I had made everything about me. My whole life was about me and serving me, and not really serving the greater purpose or my greater good. And I went through that time where it was fascinating, of how the people that you meet and how you operate, and how all of a sudden you go from all these people that don't know anybody at all to a couple of weeks in, you're the best of friends. I mean, I still talk to many of the guys every single week that I went to treatment with 3 years ago. But long story short, I started rebuilding, and I started running when I was there. I'm an early riser as it is, but it's 4 a.m., 4:30. I'd get up, I'd stretch, I'd go out to the track, and at first it was, I'm going to run 2 miles. Well, let's be honest, it was more like I'm going to jog a half mile and I'm going to walk. And as I started increasing, by the time I left 30 days later, I was running 4 or 5 miles first thing in the morning, nobody's business. I had lost 20 pounds during that 30-day stretch, which, as the lineage goes in rehab, nobody loses weight in rehab. They all gain it because they trade their addiction for drugs or alcohol or whatever. They trade it for food. That becomes their go-to. And for me, it wasn't that. I wanted to make a real change and manifest real change. And I kind of started, I absolutely started praying and meditating and understanding what that meant. And it's terrifying to sit with your thoughts if you've never done it. And it's
Yeah.
terrifying to sit with your thoughts if you're carrying burdens and weights and demons that you didn't even realize that you had. And for me, it was it was so satisfying to be able to start to get all that stuff off my chest and start to get it out of me. And then, my wife came down and visited me over, kind of family week, and she could see the change. I mean, she was ready to leave me. She was ready to take my kids, and my business, was going to go. Everything was going to go. And in great country fashion, if you play it in rewind and reverse, I get the wife back, I get the kids back, I get the truck back, etc. And it was awesome. It was awesome. I tell people all the time, the single greatest investment I've ever made in my life has never been real estate or a business or anything. It was the money that I spent to check myself into treatment, to give myself the freedom to grow into who I actually was. And then, then that's when the running took hold. So, running, 4 or 5 miles a day, every single day. And then when I got out, I was blessed. And I tell this, people laugh at me. I was blessed by COVID happening. And so when I came back from treatment, I had almost a buffer to implement and integrate myself back into society, to where it was kind of, everyone's the stay-at-home order and all that jive. It was fascinating how I was able to use that as a positive, for both myself personally as well as my business. I ended up coming back, buying my business partner out, because I basically said, "Hey, we're great friends, but we cannot coexist on that front." And from that point, it was okay. All focus is on making sure that I am the best version of myself. So I took an entire day or 2 days and sat, and I developed my purpose. What is my purpose? So my purpose is this. I'm going to work each day to be the best version of myself while enriching the lives of others. And that's it.
That's amazing. And so there's several things I want to ask you about just along that, because when I think about, there are a lot of law enforcement officers. Of course, it's not, it's our show is focused on police officers and cops and the optimization of that. But so I'm just going to shrink the audience down into our policing audience and just speak from my own experiences. But the do you think that, like, that instinct to run, like when you were there, like you get into this, that's a huge decision to make, right? First and foremost, to take that leap to realize, okay, I'm on a bad path here and I need help. Like, this is not something I can do on my own. And so that in and of itself, I think takes a tremendous amount of courage, is to ask for help when things are, when things are going sideways. But I think a lot of times, and you said something earlier about the other program, about the ego, about letting go of the ego. A lot of times, the way that we train in our culture and policing is I think we do a lot to prop up the ego, because you have to build confidence and you have to build that self-assuredness that when you're the only person there and there's 30 people fighting, like, that you're going to be able to do what needs to get done. This is kind of, I'm going in a couple different directions here, but I just think that, like, there's something to be learned from, number one, finding the strength and the courage to ask for help, but for leaders out there also to not necessarily think in traditional ways, that, the development and the self-improvement of the organization might be the secret, really might be to try to find ways to get officers some quiet time, some alone time, some downtime, and that's a hard thing to do when we talk about what we were talking about earlier in the show, right? When we're understaffed and overworked. But what do you think? What do you think it was? Do you think it's just you and your background with that instinct to run, or do you think there was something innate, like, in your personality or in your DNA, just get up and go, just go move, don't sit still?
I think it's probably twofold. I think partly my background. I was never a runner, and I think we talked about this before. I was never a competitive runner by any stretch. I ran because it was a means to an end, whether I had to pass a fitness test or I was just trying to stay in general good health or good shape, to serve my ego. And I think for me, it was, I, and the funny thing, I don't think I ever thought about it until you just asked the question. I was running on a track. So in essence, I wasn't running from something, nor was I running to something. I was running just for the sake of running. And and I think that's a huge piece is, running, if we're using it metaphorically speaking, are we running from our issues or our problems, or are we running to something? And I think that the destination has to be decided. And that's part of, kind of the ultimate journey of life, the ultimate journey of what we all desire to have happen for us. And the only person that can make that distinction or make that happen is you. And how do you uncover that? How do you tap into your true potential? How do you tap into what it is that makes you tick? What is your running? It's not going to be running for everybody, but what is your equivalent to running? And what is going to make you tick? And that, I think, is so very, very important, because it goes back to allowing officers, especially in this form, officers to disconnect and plug in somewhere else. I mean, you and I talked about CrossFit and the dynamic that played in my life and in your life, but more importantly, we talked about CrossFit not just from a physical standpoint of what it gives you and the greatness it gives you, but moreover about the community and the sense of belonging that comes with, that. It's so important to not only for you to invest into something that is good for you. And when I say, good for you, doesn't necessarily have to be physical. I mean, if arts and crafts are your thing, then cool, go make some pots or, weave a basket. It doesn't matter. But to disconnect and plug in is so valuable and so important, because it allows you to be authentic, it allows you to disconnect, and it allows you to sit with yourself, which is so valuable.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I was never really a runner myself. I could party with the best of them, when I was in the military, and continued right into part of that. I worked in a bar when I was in college, and had a lot of fun. It helped me pay for, it helped me pay my way through school along with the GI Bill, and met a lot of great people. I would never trade those times for anything. But when I got hired at the PD, and I started, I wanted to make our SWAT team. I've told this story a couple different ways, but one of the things that I was doing in the morning when I got off a midnight shift, I would go for a run, because I started this because I wanted to improve my mile and a half time for our SWAT PT test. And so I wasn't married at the time and didn't have children. So I had the time, right? I got off work. I could go run. I would go home. I'd eat breakfast, go to bed, wake up, go work out, do your traditional lifting stuff, and then, and then hang out, do whatever, and then go back to work. And, your first few years on the job, it's so exciting. You're learning so much. You're drinking through a fire hose. I mean, there's so much stimulus. And I used to listen to when I would run, hard to believe. I know even back then, like I think I was using a Sony Discman when I actually started to run, and then I found I don't know if anyone remembers the mini disc players. This is pre iPod, like. This one
had the Discman you would hold in your hand, and it was the shock resistant that wasn't really shock resistant. I had a bunch of those, and none of them worked.
And it's so funny because I was always trying to find the best technology to be able to listen to music when I was running it, because I always wanted to listen to something that was fast paced, and what I ultimately, and I don't even know where this came from. It's interesting to think about it in retrospect, but I eventually just was like, you know what? I don't want to listen to anything except maybe some classical music. I actually started listening to classical music while I was running, because I found like I just didn't want to think like, and then, the weird thing is, and again, we've talked a little bit about this, about Rattay's work, in Spark, because it was not long after I read his book. But I found like, man, about I'd run a couple miles, and then I got to run to like 5 miles, and then I would run 7 miles, and then I would run like 8 miles. And some days I'd run 10. And I never had any interest in running marathons or anything like that. I just was running because it was helping me. But I also found like, man, when I got to like that 20 to 30 minute mark in the run, like if I just ran like 2 miles, I would be glad. It was like, okay, check the box. I got my run in today. But if I ran 5 miles, it was a whole different experience, because you get to this point where, there are periods in the run where you don't even remember. Like you're just going, and your mind goes into a different place. You just relax. And some of the best ideas, and I used to, some of the most deep thinking that I've ever done in my life has been done during these runs.
Tell you two fascinating stories. One about running, and then one about CrossFit. And the first one about running is relative to life. Um, and I actually had used this with my team years ago because it happened years ago. But we live. I'm in Arizona. I live there during the school year, but then we have a place in Michigan that we spend the summers, and we're in the lake there. And around one of the lakes, because it's in between two lakes, around one of the lakes, everyone had told me it was 10 miles. And I remember, I think up at that point, maybe I'd run 8 miles. And maybe this is a year, maybe 6 months after treatment, something like that. And I think I'd maybe run 8 miles at that point. And I said, okay, I'm gonna run the lake. So I told my wife, I said, hey, I'm gonna go run the lake, blah, blah, blah. And as I start down and I get in, and for me, always, 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 the first 2 miles, it doesn't matter if I'm in top performance, in top shape, getting ready for a race or whatever, or I've been a dirt ball and I haven't run in a week. The first 2 miles for me is always so difficult because my body just doesn't get warm. It hasn't. I've acclimated so much to 2 miles is really just kind of a warm up. And I get to the 2 mile mark and I'm like, okay, I really don't feel all that great. I should feel pretty good by now. And then there's this kind of goes up this hill and then it creeps around and then the lake disappears. So now I'm just on the straightaway that's an up, a down, and back up again. And I'm thinking to myself, there's a 0% chance I have another 7 miles in me. And so I'm trotting along. And I look over, and there's 25 yards from me, there's 4 deer standing in this grassy area just off the side of the road, looking at me, and their heads are just turning as I'm running. And in that moment, I thought to myself, why aren't they scared? Why aren't they running? And then it dawned on me, they were fascinated by what I was doing. And if they're fascinated by what I'm doing, I should probably pick my head up and perform. And it was so riveting. They weren't scared to run from me. They were fascinated by what I was doing. And that got me thinking around, okay, and it goes back to something we talked about previously, is I want to do all the things and try all the things that nobody else wants to do. I want to get up in the morning and I want to jump in the ice cold pool, or I want to get in an ice bath, or I want to jump into an ice cold shower because I know other people aren't doing it and I'm willing to put the work in. I'm willing to do the dirty stuff. So I ended up finishing. The lake. Here to find out, it was only 8.7 miles. I had never mapped it. So it's only 8.7 miles. So I ended up saying, hey, well, you know what? I have a lot of gas left in the tank. I'm going to run a half marathon. So I end up looping around the other lake and coming through. I ended up doing, just like 13 and a half miles. And I had planned for 10. 10 didn't exist. So then I took it to the next level. And I thought to myself, here I was 3 miles in and I wanted to quit. I didn't really feel like I was going to have the gas, got inspired by the deer, then ended up turning into a half marathon. So long story short, We create the limiting factors in our life. Life doesn't create the limiting factors or limiting beliefs. That's all comes from within. So whether you think you can or you can't, you're right.
Yeah.
And then the flip side is the CrossFit aspect. So, mind you, I've been training and running, and I've been running and running and running, and I have endurance for days. And I do push-ups and pull-ups and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I was really just training to run. Well, I went up to Sheboygan, Michigan. It was balls cold, and
Sheboygan.
yeah, I was up there visiting. I was looking at buying a commercial property up there, and it was freezing, and I hate the cold. And I didn't feel like running. I called my buddy, and he said, "Hey, my friend owns a CrossFit gym. You should go try that." And I'd heard about CrossFit, and I said, "All right, I'll give it a try." It was pretty close to my hotel where I was staying. And I showed up, and everyone was so freaking welcoming. And you have meatheads, you have 70-year-old women, you have 18-year-old kids, you have guys that are all tatted up, you have people that look like they belong in the Olympics, and you have people that look like they just got off their couch. There's this just wild mass of different personalities and different people. So we go through this workout, and the guy had asked, the trainer had asked, the coach, he said, have you ever done CrossFit? I said, no. I said, I'm an endurance athlete. At the end of the day, like, I could do stuff all day long, but I'm not super strong anymore. That's just not my wheelhouse. Went through this amazing workout. But what really stuck with me was the community, and everyone was super supportive. Nobody knew me from Adam. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't know how to do the exercises. And and it inspired me to want more. And it wasn't the workout itself that inspired me, it was the people inspired me, because I saw what great community it was. So when I went back down south, and got to my local area, I'd found out that a friend of mine, who ironically is a recovered alcoholic, I didn't know at the time, uh, was doing CrossFit close to our house. So I went and visited them. Ended up fitting in with the core group, the 5 a.m. group, and just had amazing chemistry, amazing workouts, amazing people. And it allowed me to take my fitness component not only to the next level, but that fed the emotional aspect, the emotional need, want, desire for human connectivity. And one of the things that I see, and this kind of brings it full circle, one of the things that I see in law enforcement is the isolation aspect. Everyone feels almost as if they're on an island, and they put themselves on an island, sometimes by choice, but other times by just not knowing where the outlets are, where the good outlets are. So this isn't an ad for CrossFit, guys, but at the end of the day, that sense of community, that sense of belonging, that sense of understanding of people that are going through the same shit that you're going through day in and day out, can certainly appreciate one another. So, surrounding yourselves with like-minded people with the same needs, wants, and desires as you. If you desire to be a better family member, or husband or wife or whatever, then surround yourself with those people that are better husbands and wives. If you desire to get better at physical fitness, surround yourself with people that are in better shape and understand what they're doing in piece and part, and put together what works for you. And that's one aspect of coaching, is getting someone to understand that in order to be the best version of yourself, you're going to have to try and fail at a whole bunch of different things to find the right recipe. Because as humans, there are two things that are always consistent. We're motivated when we know the outcome, which is almost never the case. You're almost never going to know the outcome. And the second piece says we're really good at starting and not good at finishing. The separation between good and great in my book is be as effective a starter as you are a finisher.
Yeah. So a lot of things I want to touch on there as well. I think it's, going back to your first day in rehab, when you just go out and you get on the track, and one of the things that I think oftentimes is we create these limiting beliefs, or we start something, in the back of our mind, we have a limiting belief. I really can't do this. I'm going to try, but I know I can't, but I'll try. And then we give ourselves, reasons and excuses why we can't. So I'm going to go run 3 miles. I run a quarter of a mile, and now I feel like I've got to walk. I can't run. So this is a failure. I can't do it. I stop. And, we set these expectations that we know that we can't meet. And then it kind of gives us an out in a way, right? So, the CrossFit analogy there is I think it's similar because, having owned and operated a gym for a long time, the different people that come to CrossFit, everyone comes for different reasons. But sometimes one of the biggest challenges is, and I'm sure this is the same for any gym, right? Is regardless of the methodology, is how do you get somebody to come back tomorrow? How do you get them to come back the day after that? How do you get them to build consistency? And I think in the end, it really just kind of boils down to is, meeting people where they are, setting some small realistic goals as to what they can accomplish, and then just taking one step. If today is just take a step, that's good. Because tomorrow might be just take 2 steps, and the day after that might be, you take 3, and then in your case, it's you started off and you couldn't run those 3 miles. You had to stop and walk and stop and walk. You're 5'6". I think you said you were like 225 pounds, so you're way overweight. But you kept going, and then ultimately you wind up becoming an ultra marathoner. And what's the longest race you've ever ran?
35.
35.
Yeah. I was training for 60, but yeah, 35.
So if you tell yourself, hey, I'm going to be an ultra marathoner, and tomorrow I'm going to go, I haven't run in 3 years, but I'm going to be an ultra marathoner, and in 2 months, I'm going to go run 35 miles. Well, it may be possible, you might be able to do that, but there's probably a pretty good chance you're going to hurt yourself pretty bad by trying to go too far, too fast, too soon. And I think in the end, what everybody just needs to remember, regardless of where you are today, that you can reach your goals as long as you're setting realistic goals and you have a plan for how you're going to get there, and you just execute the plan, and don't worry about anybody else. And that's where I think CrossFit is so magical for so many people, because if you can get people to come back, I used to say, like, if I can get you here today and I can get you tomorrow, that's good. But if I can get someone to stay for 3 weeks, I have a far better chance of getting them to stay for 3 months. And if I can get them to stay for 3 months, they're probably going to be there for the next 3 years. They're probably going to be doing CrossFit for the next 3 years. But we lose most of those people in those first few months, maybe because I'm too sore, they do too much too quick. The ego might not let them go. And it's with a lot of police officers, it's the same way, right? I don't want to show people what my weaknesses might be. I don't want them to think less of me. And instead of actually attacking something that they need to attack, they do the exact wrong thing, and then they go back to the couch, and it's like, fuck it. I'm just going to have a beer and, sit in what Kevin Gilmartin calls the magic chair, and think that's going to solve the problem, but it doesn't.
Yeah, you just unearthed almost an entire new subsequent podcast with that rant right there. And there's so much in that. I mean, one of the things that I operate and try and instill and inspire in the people that I deal with is, if you're going to eat shit, don't nibble. You're either all in or all out. You can't be almost pregnant. It's just not possible. So one of the things that I looked at in my own journey was, if I'm going to say I'm going to do this from now on, my word to myself means more than the word of anybody else. and following that through. So you talked about, okay, well, if, in my situation, I couldn't run 3 miles to start out. I had to jog and then walk and then jog and then walk and then maybe run and then jog. It was a whole evolution. The issue around that for most people is different than what I dealt with, because I don't know if you ever heard Dan Sullivan's Gap in the Gain. A tremendous book. Huge fan of it. The simplest version is this. So we have the gain here, we have the gap here. So we have where we're at initially, where we get to. The problem is everyone always measures in here. So when I started running, I could run this far, right? That's where I was. And then maybe in 2 weeks, I could run this far. Well, I want to ultimately run this far. I'm measuring not the progress, I'm measuring the process. And that's not the given. You have to measure your progress. If you don't measure against where you started, if you desire to save money, you want to have 100 grand in the bank, whatever the number is, and you start with 0 and you move to 5,000. Well, maybe I want to save 25,000 in that same time frame. But aren't I better off now that I have 5 grand in the bank versus 0? But we're looking at the negative. We're always looking at the gap in between of what's going on. We're never appreciating what we've done, what we've accomplished to that point. And people get wrapped up into that. And it goes to the second point you brought up around what is the outside world's perception of me? Well, guess what, folks? Those of you listening, watching, whatever you're doing, it doesn't freaking matter. What somebody thinks of you doesn't matter. If what someone thinks of you influences the way that you make a decision, you better rethink what you're doing. Because I will tell you this, 100% of the people that didn't think I could do what I've done, 100% of them were wrong. And I didn't let any of them and any of their thoughts influence my needs, wants, and desires of what I was going to accomplish. And that's the same for everybody. If someone says, oh, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that, great, fantastic, that you're fueling my fire, but you're hot garbage to me, because it doesn't matter. Your thoughts and feelings and opinions of me as a person, or what I'm deciding to do, or what you're deciding to do, does not matter. And we give it far too much bandwidth in our day-to-day life of the outside influence of people's opinions, thoughts, or emotions around us. I mean, unless it's somebody in my immediate family that I've disappointed or disrupted their life in some way, shape, or form, the rest of the stuff to me is just noise. And it should be to everybody. One of the things that I work with all of my clients is, okay, if it just actually happened a couple of weeks ago. I was dealing with an individual that's having a problem with a subordinate, and I deal with mostly executives. And I was dealing with somebody that was having a problem with a subordinate.
Oh,
and
that's never been a problem in law enforcement.
Yeah. and at the end of the day, he was so worried about what he thought and what this guy was going to feel and say towards him, that it was agonizing, and it was stopping the progress of the process that they were implementing inside the department. And I broke it down very, very simply. I said this: does it need to happen? Yes. Okay. Why does it need to happen? He told me. I said, now go make it happen. So he calls me the next day. He said, I'm getting ready to go in the meeting. I said, don't call me and tell me that. And he said, why? I said, because you're making it out, you're giving it more bandwidth, and you're giving it more credibility than it absolutely needs to. You're trying to talk yourself into doing the right thing when you've already decided that was the right thing to do. And he said, fascinating. So he goes through the conversation, has a conversation. Everything works out famously, right? The guy takes the orders, marches on. Everything's great and wonderful in the world. I call him back and I said, hey, how did you feel when you did it? He said, uncomfortable. I said, well, naturally, nobody likes delivering bad news to anybody. The difference is, let me ask you one specific question. And he said, what is that? I said, did the conversation that you had in your head, was it 100 times worse than the conversation actually was? He said, yes, without question. We create all of these blinders, all these blockers, all these issues that don't exist. And we give them so much credit and so much bandwidth. So when I hear people talk about, well, so and so is not going to appreciate me, so and so doesn't like me, or they're going to view me this way, or they're going to think I'm a sissy because I'm getting coaching, or they're going to think this, or they're going to think that, guess what? They're going to think all that stuff, whether you do or you don't. So if you know
Yeah.
what's good for you, you need to follow that path, follow that passion. Sorry, that was my rant, brother.
No, that was great. And it was perfect segue because I actually had some notes about a very similar topic, and you said it better than I could have. And when you go, so one of the conversations that's in the national spotlight now is about policing culture. How is it like and we'll use Memphis because that's just the recent example. How does an organization exist where a group of 5 officers feel empowered enough to do the things that they do, even when they know that they've got body cameras that are recording what they're doing? And there's going to be more information that comes out as this investigation unfolds, as the trials, as these things work up towards trials. But so far I think 6 officers fired, 5 have been criminally charged. There's more that are likely to lose their jobs. But I always go back to the hard conversation. That's what I want to know. And that's what I'm interested in learning in the future about the organization itself is, when did we identify the potential problems? Were the difficult conversations had, or were they ignored? And I think for the people that are listening, that's what I would cue into that for the next few months. Think about here's what we're hearing. Here are the headlines, right? But the headlines are they're only part of the story. They don't get down into the roots of what's causing these types of issues. And if I'm a firm believer that if we could do a better job inside policing organizations in doing just what you just said, right? If through coaching programs like Performance Protocol, if an organization does nothing but improve the one-on-one communications between officer to officer, officer to subordinate, these peer-to-peer, peer to subordinate, and up and down the chain, if we can improve those conversations and teach people how to do that in an effective way, then your organization is going to be I don't know that there's a single thing that you could do to improve the culture of an organization. Now, it's easy to say. That is very difficult to do and to put into practice, because everybody is an individual, and just like that one individual that you described, he's fighting his own battles in trying to have that one conversation.
And as a leader, you are what you allow. And your company, your culture will become what you allow, what you deem acceptable. To make no mistake about it, you're going to have bad apples in every organization, and that's something that we as leaders, we have to understand that moving forward. But one thing you can control is how the culture gets rolled out, and more importantly, what aspects are being encouraged. People are going to follow. People naturally want to follow strong personalities, and people naturally want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. That's just human nature. And one thing that's being lost in society, and especially in law enforcement, is that ideology around people want to be a part of something greater than themselves. Because right now, with social media and everything else that's going on, that's being diluted. Dilution, I'm sorry, folks, dilution is not the solution. And we have to think about this in every facet of our life. But I think from a leadership standpoint, understanding fundamentally, you are what you allow. You can start out strong and you can back it off, but you can't start out soft and pour it on. You have to understand that there's a balance in that leadership component, and you have to empower your leaders to lead. Now, that goes with you have to also empower and offer them the opportunity to become greater leaders, to become better people, to become better officers. And in doing that is, obviously what I talk about is, get coaching, get an understanding, get an unbiased opinion to what it is that is going to make you be able to step up your game, make you able to hold your people accountable so that these terrible things don't happen. And then how are you going to continue to execute on that as you progress from a leadership from the top down? So if you allow your leaders to lead and you give them the ability to get what they need, you also have to let that trickle down to the deck plate individuals and the officers on the street. Allow them to gain and get and receive what it is that they need. If that makes sense or resonates with you.
No, I love that. Delusion is not the solution.
Yeah, dilution is not the solution. Anytime you're diluting something, it doesn't always solve the issue.
You said diluting, not delusion.
Yeah. Well, delusion will work too. But dilution is not the solution. In so many things, especially in leadership, people start grasping at straws like, hey, I'm going to do this. And then they do it for 5 minutes and realize it doesn't work. So then I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try this. Well, guess what? You were never really good at the core of leadership. You were never really good fundamentally at what it was you were doing to begin with. So as long as you're great, stay great, and then start to add ancillary things to it from a leadership standpoint.
Okay. I knew this was going to happen. We're already on a roll here, and we've been going for a while. So there's a couple more things I wanted to cover, and then we'll have to wrap this up for this episode. Otherwise, we could be on here. If we get talking about CrossFit stories, it could be it could be a few more hours. But you did tell me something like that was just for anyone that's out there that's done CrossFit, or if you know what a ring muscle up is, right? So and we can make this analogous, I guess, to trying, putting yourself on a path to learning a new skill, doing something hard, and finding a way to get it done. And people that have done there's a lot of people that have been in CrossFit gyms for years that can't do a muscle up. And for those that don't know what a muscle up is, imagine a pair of gymnastic rings that are suspended in the air, where you jump up and grab a hold of them. Your arms are fully extended. Your feet are off of the ground. And now you're going to pull yourself up and over the rings into a dip position, and then being able to press out of the dip, and then locking out overhead. There's a lot of different ways you can try to get that done, but it just, in the end, it just requires the requisite amount of strength. And then on top of that, the right coordination and the skill and the practice to be able to get it done. So you did your one. How long did it take you to get your first muscle up coming into it?
I think it was 3 weeks. So I had gotten there and I was completely humbled by it, because when I first went Sheboygan, the guy that actually owned the gym, that was my friend's buddy, he was in there doing them, and I thought, oh, I can do that. I'm super lean and I'm fairly strong. I couldn't even come close. I'd get there. I was just doing it on the bar, and I said, all right, I'm going to do this. So I went down to my gym and started working out. And I went in and told the guys, I said, hey, I want to do this. And Chad, who is he wasn't even the trainer, but he is like a CrossFit guru. He started working with me every day afterwards, and starting to try and develop the routine and understand how the rhythm and the timing is around everything, and just the overall movement. And I had gotten up. I think I'd gotten pissed off. I'll just be honest. I'd gotten pissed off because I couldn't do it, and everyone was doing it. It was at the end of a pretty rigorous workout, and I think somebody may have injected a not so nice name in my general direction, and I freaking got up and I got into the dip position like that. And I forgot what I was doing because I was so shocked that I got up, and then I just let go. So I was so pissed because I was right there. And then A few minutes later, I jumped up, tried to do it again, and I was able to lock out. And the whole gym went crazy. But long story short, yeah, it was just this methodical process of understanding, like, hey, it's okay. I'm a 40-some-year-old athlete. I'm not a 25-year-old kid. I'm not only learning a new skill set, but it requires a tremendous amount of strength, as you alluded to, and more or less, moreover than strength, I think it is about timing. It is about skill. It is about movement, because it's not something that you're naturally doing, which I think CrossFit does a great job of doing, is exercising and orienting your body in a different way that you're just not used to. But it's honestly, it's very natural movements.
Along with these limiting beliefs, here you frame this in a way that I thought was fascinating. So if you're a listener right now, and it doesn't have to be CrossFit, it can be work related, whatever. You've got something that you've wanted to accomplish, but maybe you haven't convinced yourself yet that you can do it, or if you should, or you're trying to convince yourself why you shouldn't. You use this example, and I thought it was awesome. The 30-mile story. And hey, do you want to run an ultra marathon? Oh, no, I can't. Okay. Why not? Well, because that's just too far. If and you said, if I were to put $1 million in a mailbox that's 30 miles from here, and here's the trail, right? No cheating. You got to do it on your own 2 feet, but you have 7 hours to get there. Yeah. Are you going to try? And will you? Can you get there? Will you get there?
That's the most effective use of the story, is exactly what you just said. Because I talk to clients, talk to people all the time, and that's the reference point. I always use that. That's the reference point. Before they even get started, I say, okay, look, if I put a mailbox, I tell you there's a mailbox at this address with $1 million in it, and I give you 7 hours, and it's 30 miles away. You can't use public transportation. You can't use a bicycle. You can't do anything. All you can do is use your feet. Are you going to tell me no, you can't do it? The answer is always no, because they're going to do everything in their purview, everything in their being to try and get that, because they understand. Guess what? Goes back to what we just talked about a few minutes ago. It goes back to, they know what the outcome will be. When they get there, they're a millionaire. But guess what? When you run 30 miles on your own, you don't get rewarded. You get the satisfaction, gratification of knowing that you did it, and that's it. And for most people, that's not enough. There has to be an end game, and they have to know what the end game is in order to make meaningful attempts to accomplish meaningful things. If they don't know the end game, they won't take it any further. And so part of my job as a coach is getting you to understand what that satisfaction component is, but more importantly, what you're going to get from that effort energy, that's yielded towards anything that is you're trying to accomplish.
Did you ever watch The Biggest Loser, the show The Biggest Loser?
No, I've never watched, but I'm familiar with it.
Okay. So that was kind of like one of the pinnacle things, like in their physical training, they worked up to running a marathon at the end. And I always thought it was, again, there's been a lot of, there was studies that were done that showed that I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was an overwhelming majority of the people that were on the show wound up gaining all the weight back, in some case more. And then they started another series about people that had been on the show, lost the weight, gained it all back, and then they ran a second show and had them come back on. And
it's a two-time loser.
Yeah.
We call those prisoners, don't we?
Or two-time winner, right?
Yeah.
Someone's got to win it. But I always thought that was fascinating, right? Because again, it's people that I just don't know that they're connected to their why. Like, they understand it, losing weight and being healthy is important, but they just haven't anchored it to a strong enough why. Or maybe they're not beginning with the end in mind. So I don't know. That when you told that story, it just, it kind of reminded me of that. And I'm sure there's a greater lesson in there somewhere that I'm not smart enough to figure out. But
You picked it up. I mean, and then you retained it. That's the beautiful thing. You retained it, and you used it in fantastic context. So kudos to you. It, everything goes back to your why. What do you want to accomplish, and more importantly, why? And if you can get to that core, and you can surround yourself with people that support that mission, that want, and you provide the will to get there, you can accomplish and do whatever you want to do. Now, are you going to be able to do it at the level that you maybe want to do it? Not always, because sometimes that's just not in the cards, and we have to be accepting of that. As I was just talking to my wife the other day, I play in a basketball league, and I'm a little guy, but I'm a very good basketball player, especially at my age. And I playing this league, and it's predominantly late 20s, early 30s guys. All bigger, stronger, faster than me. And I got in the car the other night. We had lost our first game. And I got in the car last night, and I kind of looked at her and I said, age is a bitch. Because I knew, I knew that I didn't play awful, but I didn't play like I thought I could play, just because I physically can't do it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with, hey, I couldn't make it a step further, a step quicker to a loose ball. It wasn't for lack of effort. It was just simply, hey, sometimes that you get to a point where the resistance is not here. The resistance really is just here. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's being okay in the moment. And I go back 4 or 5 years. If that would have happened, I would have bitched, griped, and complained. I would have cast blame elsewhere. It would have been blame, denial. I would admit nothing, deny everything, make counter accusations. That was the world that I lived in. And that's the world that most people live in, is taking taking a true accountability to what you're doing is not comfortable. And for me, I look at it and simply say, it is what it is. I've done the best I could do at this point. Now it's time to move forward. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, maybe it's time for you to take up pickleball.
Hey, no, it's not happening. I'm gonna continue to play until I can't play anymore. But thank you for the offer. Hit me up when I'm 65.
Hey, listen, I'm telling you, fastest growing sport
Yeah,
in America right now. And Tom Brady's in. My fellow Boilermaker Drew Brees is in. They're all in on pickleball. And I used to serve on our city parks board, and I saw this. About 6-7 years ago. The push for pickleball, and I think again, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I think it's fascinating. I think it's very similar to the CrossFit story, where like there's this community that blossoms up around this sport, and it's engaging, it's getting people together, and it really grew fast in elderly communities, because for them it was a way to connect with each other and to do something physically active, not just the stereotypical aging story, right, that you hear, right, get off my lawn, the curmudgeon-y type of approach to aging. But I don't know, aging doesn't have to be that way. I think pickleball is, I'm going to actually learn how to play. I used to be a pretty good ping pong player, so I'm figuring, all right, I'm in pretty damn good shape for a guy in my mid 50s, so I could go out. I think I could probably go dominate on the pickleball court. Now, doesn't mean I'm not going to go run my. I'm running a DECA race here, Spartan DECA race in a couple weeks,
nice.
which I'm going to give a little sneak preview.
I must have worn my Spartan shirt earlier.
Yeah, so I reached out to an individual. I don't want to give it away, but someone that is a champion in the DECA fit realm, because I want, like a lot of people, right? You see someone that's out there kicking your ass, and that's not using age as an excuse, no barrier. I'm like, all right, I got to know, how does this guy train? What's he doing? What's his mindset? What does he know that I don't know? How can I use his story to improve my own story? And I think for here, I think maybe this is, we can wrap this up with this, because there was one last thing that you mentioned I wanted to bring up. It's in the discussion about why coaching. And we talked about why sometimes coaching is often misunderstood. Maybe it's misrepresented. but uh, you mentioned that people need a safe outlet, and they need an outlet. They need to be able to talk to somebody who's going to be non-judgmental, that's going to give them direct feedback, that's not giving advice, but is being a good active listener, and then helping somebody uh, create a plan and approach for themselves. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. I mean, to me, coaching is the planet fitness, the judgment free zone of your being. It is, you know, it's something you just touch on it. You're going to get help to run a Spartan race from somebody who has done better than you. And you're doing that because you want to get better, not because you want to be like him or her. I don't know who it is. And it's the same thing with coaching. It's not about giving advice. I always tell people, I don't get it. I don't give advice. I'll listen to you. I'll fire some ideas at you. But moreover, you have all the answers. I have none. And I think that's the piece around coaching, is just understanding how to reframe so that people can understand that they have the answers, but more importantly, creating tools and resources of understanding of how they take their thoughts, desires, and emotions, and then they act on them accordingly, but more importantly, according to what they want to have happen. And we all have the answers. They're right there in front of us, and we all know right from wrong. The difference is having a safe outlet to bounce something off of is a resource that's 100% invaluable. It's so valuable to everybody. I have coaches, I have mentors, I have people that I go to on the daily. I have, you know, spiritual people, I have business people. You know, I have a pretty much a mentor and a coach for just about every facet of my life. And it's not because I'm an idiot and I'm all screwed up. Well, I guess there's some truth to all screwed up, but it's because I know that having that outlet of expertise and understanding in whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish is so important and so valuable, and I get a tremendous amount from it.
So, what are the dangers of echo chambers? That's in my notes, and I think one of the advantages of a program like Performance Protocol is it gives you an opportunity to get outside of the bubble in which you're operating and you're living in, and because you could be in the finest, most fine-tuned organization in the world, or you could be in a total shit show and just not know it, and without sometimes opening up and trying, making a concerted effort to expand our horizons. You may not know that there is a better way, or there's a more efficient way, a more effective way. And worst case scenario or best case scenario, depending on how you look at it, right? You might confirm what you already believe, right? That the way you're doing it is good, or the way that you're doing it is bad. Either way, I think coaching again, it's just another opportunity to open up a new frontier into self-improvement and individual optimization.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, you're talking about from a leadership standpoint. If the narrative becomes, we do this because this is how we've always done it, you're wrong. And from a personal standpoint, I've gotten here by doing these things, and you think that those ways are going to get you to the next level, you're wrong. And that's just the cold hard facts and the cold hard truth around just evolving as humans, evolving as a society, evolving as a culture. Across the board. If you think that what got you to where you're at, whether organizationally speaking or individually speaking, is going to get you to the next facet, the next step in your life, unless you like where you're at and want to stay exactly where you're at, then that's what you're going to get.
All right, let's wrap this up. Couple quick things. What are you reading right now? What's the latest book that you've read?
Oh, a fantastic one. Actually, I just sat down with the author earlier this week. Head Trash by Rini Cavallari. It's fantastic. Yeah, fantastic book thus far. But yeah, it's about, in essence, kind of in short, clearing the mechanism. So I just started that a couple of days ago and had the opportunity to sit down with her for a couple hours, and pick her brain. So that's fantastic. I can't give you a review yet because I haven't finished it, but I like where it started.
I'm reading Cameron Haynes' book, and I thought it was important that I bring this up because I'm talking to someone who runs ultra marathons, and I know a lot of people in policing world know who Cam Haynes is as because he's a maybe one of the best bow hunters in the world, but he's also an endurance athlete and an ultra marathoner, runs the 100-mile plus races. And I I think his story is so fascinating, so motivating. Um, I can't, I'm only halfway through the book, and it just, that one's pulling on a lot of my strings. So I'm looking forward to chewing through it. But the last thing I have is I can't help but the Boilermaker in me just can't help. It was almost like there was something in my subconscious that kept getting attracted to the background, and I swear I can see Bobby Knight
Yeah, yeah,
getting ready to throw a
yeah.
chair across the floor at Mackey Arena here in my hometown.
100% is. Yeah. I've always been a huge Bobby Knight fan. And uh, at the end of the day, I collect sports memorabilia. And one of the things that I had gifted myself probably 6 or 7 years ago is that autograph piece. I think just because it shows, and this speaks to what we're talking about, it shows that despite you have so much knowledge, so much respect, everyone fawning at you, even in your finest moment, you can show the worst side of you if you allow the outside influences to impact your decision making.
Well, that was my senior year in high school. He threw that chair. Oh,
Robert
that's
Montgomery.
that's classic. Well, I'm just gonna have to leave it there for now. Um, I really appreciate you spending some time with us. This has been a very fun conversation. This is twice now, and I'm looking forward. We're gonna have to set up a time down the road where we revisit this because I want
Yeah,
to.
we could chunk down on some stuff.
Yeah, I really want to get in the weeds on some of even just like the training approach to ultra marathons. There's so much science behind not just the methodology and how to train and prepare for races like that, but about why those things can be so they can be so good for your health and your mental well-being. Um, but I just can't help but to think of like what would it be like, and this will I'm going to give us some homework, right? What would it be like if in a police department where you could take an officer for 1 week out of their year and remove them from all of their responsibilities, throw them out in nature or wherever it is, give them some solitude. Um, and that goes to my interview with Michael Easter. That episode is going to be dropping here in the next couple of weeks. Um, he wrote the book Lead Yourself First, and he just really focuses on that concept of solitude. And I just think there's a lot that we could benefit from. I think it would just be a great way for individual officers to. Oh man, that was a little slur there, wasn't it? Need to get a drink. Uh, a way to like connect with their purpose, with their why, to re-energize, recharge. And it's just something that it's not, I guess we have vacation time, we do have time off, but we don't make it a cultural obligation or responsibility to provide our people that reset time. So there we go. How about that? Think about
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I like it. Because I think a break's needed. I mean, I mentioned earlier, I took days, in solitude to figure out my purpose and understand, what that was going to look like for the rest of my life, and creating an understanding that I think is key to everything that I'm doing.
All right. Well,
Hi, my friend.
thank you. I really appreciate it. And with that, I'm 1042. We'll talk to you guys soon.